Well, I have to admit I wasn't very big on the Rams' chances in 2020. I thought the Seahawks were going to be the best team in the division, which in the regular season they were. I also thought that Arizona was going to be better than they ultimately ended up being, in part due to a late season collapse. But the Rams surprised me a little bit. Now, admittedly, we have to be clear, it's always a fortuitous turn of the schedule when you can face all four teams in the NFC least. Because that could potentially add 4 wins to your victory column. And that's what it did for the Rams. So if you look at this objectively, you say, okay, they went 4-0 against the NFC least. That helped them a lot. They also had some really bad losses, twice to the 49ers, and also lost to the Jets. Let's not forget that. If anything, part of the concern that I had about this team going into the season was Jared Goff. And I don't think any of those concerns got assuaged throughout the course of the season, and especially for the Rams organization. When you look at this Rams team, it's kind of interesting because they were 4-0 against the NFC least, had some really bad losses I just talked about. They finished 6-6 against everyone else. So you could argue if you didn't have the NFC least on the schedule, they're more like a 500 team. But you can only play who you're scheduled against. That's what it comes down to. They ended up managing to make the playoffs at 10-6. And that's even including that late season injury to Jared Goff where they didn't have him for the Week 17 start against Arizona. So all in all, not a totally lost season for this Rams team. Certainly not the heights of a couple years ago where they were the NFC champions, but got into the mix. And with that defense that they had, once you get into the playoffs, who knows what could happen? And you look at what happened in the wild card round. They went into Seattle and their defense really carried them, and they made Russell Wilson and that Seahawks offense look bad on that day, and they won, but then reality set in pretty quickly as they went to Lambeau in the divisional round, and the Packers beat them up pretty good 32-18. So for a Rams team that clearly is in a win-now mode based off of moves that they've made, trades that they've made, draft pick capitals, particularly first-round picks that they've peeled off in recent years, and how they've kind of went fugazi, it's all fake when it comes to the salary cap. Well, it's not always fake. Eventually those chickens are going to come home to roost. For a team that is clearly in an win-now, all-in type of mode, going 10-6 and making the divisional round of the playoffs is not getting it done. That's just not good enough. Like some teams and circumstances and situations are different. Some teams, if you said, hey, you go 10-6 and win a playoff game, you feel pretty good about it. And for some teams, that absolutely should be something to build upon, or it changes the culture after so many years of losing, whatever the case might be. Or it's something to build on for the future. For the Rams, I don't think it's any of that. It's an indication that they're all in, and they don't have a team that they can truly go all in with. As you look at them offensively, they're a middle-of-the-pack offensive unit. Jared Goff not really living up to the big contract, which, it's one of these things that this is a guy you gave up a crap ton to move up in the draft back in 2016 to take him number 1 overall. And then a couple of years in, you're going to the Super Bowl with him, but he lays an absolute egg in said Super Bowl. And now you give him a big contract anyways, and then he goes out and is pretty mediocre or average, if that. To the point where you really truly got the sense that Sean McVay preferred John Wofford over Jared Goff. And that's saying something. And when you look at the offense, like how did this team even end up in the position that they ended up in come the playoffs? It's because of their defense. Like their defense had a fantastic year. They are first in the league against the pass, third against the rush. They were first in total yards allowed per game. Like this was truly an elite defensive unit. And they played like it, and the statistics backed them up. They gave up the fewest points in the league under, what ended up being a one-and-done defensive coordinator in Brandon Staley. Aaron Donald had another kind of dominant season, which is pretty typical for him. You got a resurgent, rebirth, really, type of season out of Leonard Floyd. Bring him in on a 1-year contract, and he ends up with 10.5 sacks. Bears fans are like, well, what the fuck? Where the hell was that ever at? So they got some good performances out of guys, and this unit was incredibly well coached. They've invested quite a bit into it, obviously, with Donald and his big contract, the 2 first-round picks and the big contract invested in Jalen Ramsey. So their defense should play at a high level, and they certainly did. But again, as I reference, and I've talked about it in other videos, defense is nice. And for the old school people that still think it's the 80s and 90s or beforehand, defense is great, but it does not win you championships in today's league. And people need to get that through their skulls. And that goes up to and including NFL organizations. It's an offense-driven, offense-centric, offense-dominated league. Yes, you would like your defense to be at least competent, play well, but you don't want to so heavily invest in the defensive side of the ball that you take for granted the offensive side. Because if you look at it based off of the old days, and you say, well, the Rams have this great defense, they should have made the Super Bowl, but they didn't. Why? Because their offense fell apart and their quarterback stunk. If you don't have the quarterback, it don't matter. And what's crazy to think about it too is you look at that draft, both 2016 and the 2016 draft specifically, both Jared Goff and Carson Wentz. Those are two quarterbacks that went 1-2 in that draft that both the Rams and Eagles made big moves up the draft board to go get. They enjoyed some form of success with them, but then had some disappointment with them, but still gave them big contract extensions. And then right after giving them those big contract extensions, both of those quarterbacks have now been shown the door. It's fascinating when you think about it. And it's really fascinating because the Rams took Jared Goff and packaged up a couple of first-round picks into the mix to entice the Lions to take out Jared Goff and his contract so they could bring in Matthew Stafford, the guy who has one Pro Bowl appearance in his over decade-plus career. The Matthew Stafford that has won exactly how many playoff games? Exactly. It's really interesting that they turned to a Matthew Stafford as the answer. Now, is he objectively better than Jared Goff? Absolutely. But how much better is he really? How much better is this Rams team going to be with a Matthew Stafford at the helm than it is a Jared Goff? And when you really think about it, look at all those picks that they invested into Jared Goff. Now you're talking about you invested all of those picks plus 2 future first-round picks to bring in somebody else's 30-plus-year-old quarterback in Matthew Stafford. That is a heavy price to invest in the quarterback position. And now when you look at the Rams, too, the last first-round pick they had was Jared Goff. Haven't had a first-round pick since 2016, and the way it stands right now, they won't have another one until 2023. So this Rams organization is a fascinating case study when it comes to draft pick capital, how you utilize your draft pick capital, what you do to leverage any power that you have with it, and whether it makes sense to accumulate draft picks, keep draft picks, or deal away draft picks for veteran help. Personally, I think it is less than ideal to go 7 or 8 years without a first-round pick in the draft. Just seems less than ideal. Now, maybe you could make it work, but goddamn, it better work now, because you had to get rid of 2 future first-round picks because you gave Jared Goff a big contract that you didn't need. Let's be clear, you did not need to fucking give him. So you're paying the price for your own stupidity of bad decisions by potentially making that future decision even worse to bring in Stafford for maybe 2 years, maybe longer, but 2 years for sure. And in the process, you don't have a first-round pick for either the 2022 or 2023 drafts. It's just insane to me. And this is a team that, doesn't have cap space, but you got to figure out, are you going to be able to bring back guys like John Johnson and Leonard Floyd, Gerald Everett, Troy Hill, A'Shawn Robinson? It certainly would be nice for them to bring back a Leonard Floyd because he had a good performance in his one season with the Rams. But now you're also talking about this is a team that's changing defensive coordinators because Brandon Staley got hired to be the Los Angeles Chargers head coach. There's a lot of questions here about this Rams team. And, I look at them offensively. They have needs, I think, in all different places on the offense. They could use another wide receiver. Look, if you're going to bring in Matthew Stafford, you better do all you can to help him. And I don't know if Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods in the passing game is enough. They certainly need some help on that offensive line, especially some young depth that could potentially step into the fold. But I look at this team, man, and it better work. It absolutely better work. If they weren't already all in before, which they were, and it hasn't worked. Let's be clear, it has not worked. Because the name of the game, the goal of the program is to not make the damn divisional round of the playoffs and win 10 games. The goal is to get 2 and win the Super Bowl. And if Matthew Stafford comes in and he's not a Pro Bowler, Matthew Stafford comes in and you're not winning that division, if Matthew Stafford comes in and you're not playing next year in the NFC Championship game, now this is really going to go down as really one of those head-scratching, stupid-ass decisions that's going to have long-term consequences and ramifications and repercussions for this Rams organization.